Hey, fellow pastors, McKay here. And if someone asked you to describe what preaching is, what would you say? And I know it's like, what do you mean? What would I say? I preach every week. I know exactly what preaching is. Okay, what is it? And if you're like me, you might pause and stumble just a bit because it's one of those things that seems self defined. Preaching is preaching. We do it, we know it when we hear it. But how do we actually describe it? This is really important because if we don't know the distinction between preaching and other forms of communication, let's say teaching, then we're going to be aiming at the wrong target. And we are really going to miss the opportunity that the Lord has for us in this unique calling. So, to answer the question, we are really quickly going to go through a clarification, a pitfall, a nuance, and a couple of implications that are going to really be important for you and your ministry. First of all, a clarification that preaching is not synonymous with teaching. This might already be a no-brainer. Okay, we know that. But we preach as if they are synonymous because the difference essentially is that teaching is the communication and transfer of information and knowledge, concepts. Preaching, however, is different. It is not merely the transfer of information, it is the impressing of that information into the heart and calling for a response. So if teaching is answering the question, what does this mean? Preaching gets to the heart of why does this matter? And that leads to the pitfall that if we preach as if preaching and teaching are the same thing, then we might provide lots of really good information, but we are not going to be aiming for heart transformation. Now, the Lord can use teaching, obviously, to change hearts, but preaching itself is not a classroom context. It is a life transformational event. And that is not to downgrade teaching, not at all. Teaching has incredible value. In fact, that's where the nuance is in this. Because preaching isn't less than teaching, it's just more. And we see it in the Greek words that are used. Didache, teaching, kerygma, preaching. One is instruction, the other is proclamation. And it's interesting that in the New Testament, those two words are used together, but not as if they are synonymous. In fact, what we want to emphasize is that good preaching is built on really good teaching. It's not that you have one or the other. You're going to have both. You can have teaching without preaching, but you can't have preaching without teaching, if that makes sense. So what about the implications of this? Well, first for the preacher, then for the listener. For the preacher, this means that as we approach the homiletical task of preparing a sermon, not just a lecture, we are not only aiming for mental understanding, but for holistic life transformation. We want there to be a response in the people to receive the promise of God, to believe and rest in the finished work of Jesus, then to walk with him in the power of the Spirit, all by grace, all motivated by the love of God, and all empowered by his indwelling presence. And so we're going to bring emotion to this, not just rationality, but the emotion of persuasion. We want people to feel the truth and to respond, to receive. And that's where, for the listener, the implication lies. Because we don't just want them to fill their notebooks with information. We want to truly see them leave with a transformed heart. And we know we can't do that, but that's the work of the Spirit through preaching, where people actually come alive in that moment, during that event. They come alive to the wonder, beauty, and power of the cross of Jesus, of the crucified, risen, and reigning Lord, who is promised to return. So all of that is part of what preaching is. It is not merely teaching. It is teaching plus, we might say. Always focusing on the redemptive promise of God in Jesus. Hope that helps. So this Sunday, as you prepare your message and stand up to preach, teach, but also preach with all of your heart the fullness of God's grace, the beauty of redemption in our substitute, Jesus. My name is McKay Caston. If you want more info on this or how to actually do this, check out preach360.com. And as always, feel free to reach out. It'll be a joy to hear from you.